Neurodiversity, the idea that each person experiences and interacts with the world around them in different ways, is a truly empowering concept. When we remove labels that promote a view of the self and others that is deficit focused rather than strength focused, we can reduce bias and judgment while promoting acceptance and forward momentum. I've certainly found that there is no one right way of thinking, learning, behaving, or communicating. The key for ourselves and others is to focus on fostering beliefs and inclusive environments that recognize and emphasize each person's individual strengths while also providing support for differences and needs. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life question. I was diagnosed with a learning disorder in grade school. I was pulled out of the classroom for special classes and was teased by other kids. My dad's habit of calling me stupid didn't help. I've always felt excluded and odd, whether at home, school, or work. My partner and I have a little girl who is about to enter kindergarten. I think she's on the spectrum, and I don't want her to feel shamed or judged. What do you suggest? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Bri DeRosa, who will be sharing her expertise on neurodiversity, special needs, and the differences families can make in big and small ways. Welcome to the podcast, Bri. It's such a delight to have you.
Thanks so much for having me back. I'm really excited to be here with you again. I always love being on your podcast.
Thank you. And you have so much experience and so much information to share. So before we launch in to the episode and responding to this listener's very important question, could you tell our listeners who may not have heard your other podcast a little bit about what makes you you?
Sure. So I will say, I'm here as always representing in my role as content manager for the Family Dinner Project. And I'm also here in my role as a parent and as the parent of a neurodivergent child. And as someone who has background in, I've worked in many settings with neurodivergent kids and families, and just really, really excited to be here today talking about things like family dinner and the setup at home and the family systems that can really support people like your listener who wrote in with this incredible question.
It is a deep, and it's a few sentences, but it's a deep question because it goes to a lot of different issues. And so would you please share a little bit with our listeners a little more about the Family Dinner Project for people who don't know what it is?
Sure. So the Family Dinner Project is a nonprofit program of the Massachusetts General Hospital Psychiatry Academy. And we've been around for a little over a decade now. And we really exist because there are decades and decades and decades of research that demonstrate and continue to demonstrate that family dinners or family meal times are really good for people. Kids, adults, everybody. They benefit in physical ways and neurological ways, academically, socially, emotionally, all kinds of things. It reduces risk factors for teens. There are a lot of good things about family meals, but it's really hard to bring people together at the table, especially in modern family life. And only about 30% of families actually report being able to have regular meals together. So we kind of exist to be the how and to help families overcome the many, many challenges and obstacles to marrying food, fun, and conversation about things that matter, which we believe are the three ingredients that make family meals really protective and special.
Food, fun, and conversation. I absolutely love that. And it made me take a step back when I heard that stat about only 30% of families manage to have a meal together. We're not even talking dinner on a regular basis. And that's such an interesting statistic because it's telling us that 70% of families are not able to do that, and no blame or shame, but how interesting that mealtime, which is often, especially dinner time, right? When things are winding down, it is often just that perfect place to catch up, to put
Mhm.
tech aside, homework aside, business aside, and to say, hey, here I am. How are you? What's been going on for you? So, and I know that sounds easy in theory. Oh, let's just sit down and have a family dinner together. But in practice, for parents, and whether you're, two parents in a household or a single parent, it can be carving out even 45 minutes can feel like, oh my God, how am I going to do that? And so, through the lens of today's question, which is really paying special attention to how people who are working with special needs, parents, kids, and neurodivergence, how can we create these simple opportunities to maybe reduce some shame, make a positive difference, and help promote a more open and less biased way of looking at the world, where people are seen through their so-called weaknesses rather than their strengths.
I want to also just call out right at the beginning of this conversation that it can even be especially difficult for families like your listeners, whose question we're talking about today. It can be especially difficult for a family that is dealing with neurodivergence at the adult or the child level, in this case, both, right? To actually have a sort of connection promoting family meal. I'm going to just call out that there's a little chime going off in the background. I don't know if you can hear it. Um,
I didn't hear it, but that's
okay.
okay. It just helps us know that everything's imperfect and we love imperfection on this podcast.
I'm a I'm a whole real human with my own family dynamics, and there was wash going in the background that just let me know it was done with a charming little song that it plays. So apologies for the sidetrack, but it can be really difficult for family meals to actually be connected and calm and regulation promoting when you also have neurodivergence at the table, because the very fact of this listener's child potentially, she says, being on the spectrum, that itself comes with a whole host of possible reasons why mealtime could be really difficult for that child, and difficult for the parents to navigate for that child in a supportive and loving way. So I think there's a lot here that we can talk about.
Excellent. So let's start with the parent. How would this parent be approaching mealtime in a way that respects their issues, their learning? And of course, there are a lot of shame-based thoughts going on in the background, thanks to teasing and comments by dad, right? So this parent is coming in with their own fears, their own issues, their own shame. What could you recommend so that mealtime isn't triggering?
Yeah, that is such a great question, because right off the bat, we've got potential mealtime trauma, right?
Mm.
And part of creating a welcoming table, and I'm going to just name here that we actually have an initiative at the Family Dinner Project called the Welcoming Table, which is a whole series of resources which we are continuing to build out that are around these very tricky issues of supporting families who are dealing with neurodivergences and traumas and all kinds of things that kind of go beyond the scope of typical family dinner challenges, right? And trauma is such a multi-layered issue when you're talking about meal times. A parent who may feel some kind of, to use your word, trigger at the family dinner table or at family meal times because of this kind of history that has been described here, first thing first, that parent deserves their own support network, right? So this is something they need to work on for themselves away from the table. And whether that's therapy, whether that's getting emotional support from a partner, preferably both, reaching out to friends and really starting to process some of those issues of self-esteem and what it feels like to be at the table in an environment that possibly triggers that feeling of this is not safe, this is not emotionally comforting to me, right? So first being able to work through that and name and understand where that comes from and give themselves some grace, right? And then I think the other thing is to have some coping mechanisms in place that they can use both away from and at the table. So if you've got, a little deep breathing exercise that you can do, box breathing or something like that, that works really well to calm your nervous system, and you can do that away from the table, that's step one. And then you know that you have that reserve that you can call upon at the table. Right? If you're starting to feel kind of overwhelmed or something, you can actually take that pause and take that minute to do some box breathing. And you can even let your family know, right? There's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, sometimes when mommy feels really overwhelmed, mom needs to do a little breathing exercise. And I'm going to just take a minute to do it right now so that I can feel calm and happy with you right now, right? Let your family see, let your child see that you are caring for yourself and that that's an okay and expected thing for people to do. I think that's really powerful. And then the third thing, before I let you kind of jump back in on the conversation here, but the third thing I think is to come up with some way to make your own family dinner routine start off and feel predictable and safe to you and to your family members when you come to the table each night. So maybe it's as simple as, for this person, maybe they feel really good about like lighting the candles on the table before they sit down every night. Maybe they feel really good about transitioning into mealtime with a playlist that they really like, or with holding hands around the table and smiling at each other and saying one reason that they're happy to be there together. Whatever that little ritual is that helps them transition in and remember, this is their space now. This is not the space from their childhood. This is theirs and their ritual and their family meal to own and claim for whatever feels good for them.
I am sitting here just so stunned by what you said because it is very rich, very deep. And even though we didn't really plan on talking about mealtime trauma, I am so glad you did. I would say in my private practice over the years, a huge proportion, maybe 80% of my clients, especially those with eating issues, self-esteem issues, body issues, have mealtime trauma, and we don't talk about it enough, and people don't realize that it is an aspect of trauma. So whether you're being told while you're reaching for a slice of bread, you shouldn't have bread, or a comment like, oh, you don't need to get any fatter than you are, or all of these kind of comments that, or somebody doling out, a 3 pieces of pasta and saying, this is all you get because you're too chubby. All of these things that are in people's minds that make them go through life if they haven't addressed it. Trauma sticks with us until we address it. Trauma does not know chronological time. So if the trauma starts when, you're a year old, or 5 years or 6 years, and you never address it, and you're now 40, 50, 60, 30, 20, whatever it is, that trauma is still going to be there, often ruling you unconsciously. So I love how you have spelled out these steps for saying, first, mom, dad, caregiver, process your trauma. Let it come up in a safe way, in a safe space with a psychotherapist, a support group, whatever it is. Process that trauma. And then, listeners, I want to spell out her steps again in very short form because they are so worth drawing attention to. First, calm yourself. Box breathing is really a wonderful breathing tool. And could you, just quickly popping back to you, Bri, let our listeners know, because there's so many breathing exercises you can do, 4-part breathing, pin dot breathing, all of the ones that I mention in my book, Joy from Fear. There are so many ways to breathe to calm your nervous system. Would you please describe box breathing?
Yeah, so box breathing is just very simply, and I recommended it here because it's so easy to do and quick, right? So it's just very simply, you're going to start by breathing in through your nose, and you're going to exhale through your mouth. And when you breathe in through your nose, you're going to count in slowly to a count of 4 as you breathe. And then you're going to hold for 4 seconds. And then you're going to breathe out through your mouth for 4 seconds. So you're just kind of regulating that 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, right? It's very symmetrical, it's very simple, and it's the in through your nose, out through your mouth. And it very, very quickly for many people is effective in just bringing your nervous system down, right? It just takes everything from here to here really, really quickly. And it's a powerful tool that adults can use, but also simple enough to be able to demonstrate it for a child, which is super helpful. And I know with my own kids, when they were little, I sometimes would try to help them understand the concept of breathing out through their mouth by asking them to pretend they were blowing out a candle or blowing up a balloon, right? So you can also add some imagery to that for kids that's really simple and effective and helps them kind of grasp what you're trying to do.
Thank you for making it very simple. And it's interesting. I was working with a client the other day who had started doing box breathing because I had recommended it in a session. And when we did his last session, he said, I'm doing it all the time and people are stopping me and asking me if I'm okay. And he says, I hold up my hand and I say, I'm okay. I'm just breathing. I'm
I'm
just
like
breathing.
maybe the most okay that I've been all day. This is my space, right?
Yes, and it's
Uh,
making such profound. He said he couldn't believe what a difference it's making because he tends to race around, and don't we all often, or far too often when we're stressed, do that racing thing. And breathing, any other type of breathing exercise can bring you back to the here and now, calm your nervous system. And what a good model this is clearly for other people in the world who get curious about what is this person doing. But then back to the home, it's being a really wonderful role model for kids of all ages to see, wait a second, mom, dad, caregiver, whoever, they get stressed too, and it's okay for me to pause and self-regulate
yeah.
or down-regulate.
Yeah. It's not just okay, it's now built, it's like an expectation, right? When you model these things for your kids and they see you do, it's just like, we say you should model healthy eating. You should, if you want your kid to be a reader, you should let them see you read. If you want your kid to have good self-regulation skills and good self-care skills, you have to let them see you do that, right? And for this particular question that we have today, what an important thing, because self-care and self-regulation and feeling okay about being able to cope in any given situation, these things are so important when you're navigating the world with a learning difference, or you're on the autism spectrum, or you have some other kind of neurological difference that makes you feel, in this, in this listener's words, kind of the odd man out, right? You
Hmm.
need those kinds of skills and that kind of platform for yourself to be able to give back to yourself and be able to share that with your child.
Such a wonderful point. Thank you for emphasizing it. And then we have the calming the self. Now we already moved into point two a little deeper, which is the model self-care. And I made a note, you're also modeling self-awareness.
Mhm.
Because the minute you pause and say, wait a second, mommy or daddy, or I need a break, just you're showing I'm aware, whether I'm getting frustrated, I'm angry, I'm lonely, I'm tired, I'm sad, I'm just exhausted. It's okay. I'm aware of this and I'm just going to pause and take
Mhm.
a moment
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
you breathe. So that's the modeling. And then the last, I love the third one. I'm a big ritual person. So you're talking about the importance of these simple, calming, soothing rituals. Play light candles, do your favorite playlist, do a blessing, a gratitude, grace, whatever it is that you like to do. I know for me, sometimes it's just fun to set the places.
Mhm.
Napkin for placemat, drinks, water, that sort of thing. And it's just a very lovely ritual. And then kids can learn those rituals as well, sharing, what was going on with your day while you're setting the table, just doing these kind of rituals that wire into the body and
Mhm.
the brain that
Mhm.
this is a time that's going to be fun and relaxing and connective.
Yeah.
So thank you for those three highlights.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I want to also just point out, for our listeners here that these transition techniques are really key for a lot of kids who might be on the autism spectrum or have ADHD or have some sort of other challenge that makes transitions in particular difficult for them. So this listener hasn't even named whether or not this child who they believe is on the spectrum. And I by the way, I hope that they're going to get a confirmation for this kid, because diagnosis is power, right? Knowledge is
Yes.
power. But and I'm sure that they will, but they're suspecting that this is a child on the autism spectrum. And that to me suggests that there is very much a possibility that this child has difficulty shifting gears, right? Lots of little kids have a tough time with transitions. Little kids who are on the spectrum or have ADHD or something else going on have a lot of trouble with transitions frequently. And so the whole act of kind of trying to get this child to come to the table, sometimes we hear from parents that in and of itself is a deal breaker, because this kid is so dysregulated around transitions alone that just the whole stopping playtime or stopping your TV show or stopping whatever else you're doing to come and sit and eat is disruptive and upsetting to them. And I want to make sure that we're very clear with parents here. As you said in your intro, we're strengths based. We're not deficits based, right? So none of this should be about fixing the kid. This is about fixing the way we set up the environment and the way that we set up our own understanding and responses to this child's needs. Right. And if they're having trouble transitioning to dinner, it's not about them. It's about that communicates something to us that we need to help them and support them in that transition. So having rituals, having expectations that they can kind of hang their hat on a little bit and know what's going to come and know, like, okay, every night when this happens, that means it's part of leading me from this to this, and building in lots of time and getting input from that kid too, right? Maybe they want to pick the music. Maybe they want to pick the way that we open a family meal, whatever it is, but getting them through that time and into mealtime is almost as important as anything else that you're going to do at the table.
Thank you for that piece. It is so important, and one that took me a while to learn as an individual, that here, in the adult's mind, you're planning A, B, C down to step Z, maybe the moment you come home. So
Mm-hmm.
you know where you're headed. You have this linear idea or somewhat linear idea what's happening, and your child does not. They're not inside your head. So we expect them, we snap our fingers, say, clean your room, do your homework, do this, and we're not honoring that they need to have some control and sense of the lay of the land. And that's so, thank you for highlighting that, because we often forget that it's much just like if somebody snaps their fingers and says to me, "Hey, come here right now." And wait a minute, I'm in the middle of something. No, let me finish, or give me some notice that it's time to go. And we want to do that same thing for our little ones, even more so, realizing kids can really get immersed in their activities. I mean, we all can, but we want to treat them in a respectful way and say, if we're able to include them, that's often fun, but to give maybe a 10-minute warning and then a 5-minute alert, and then say, okay, it's time. Will you come help me lay out the placemats? And by doing that, we are allowing them and allowing them to transition in an easier way. It's not that it's going to be simple. I also love the part that you called out about expectations, because we want the child, we all, no matter how free flowing we are, we like consistency. We like to be able to predict things. So by a parent setting as consistent a schedule as possible, as consistent rituals, because even if a schedule is a bit unpredictable, the child, by seeing the rituals, oh, mommy's lighting the candle,
Mm-hmm.
or daddy's laying out the placemats, or daddy's taking out the recycling. That means it's almost dinner time, whatever it is. We are seeing, oh, they're putting out the drinks. There goes the milk. There's the water. There's
Mm-hmm.
mommy's cup of tea, whatever it is. They're seeing this is a predictable schedule. And kids love predictability, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. Kids love predictability. And by the way, we talked about trauma. If you have experienced trauma or your child has experienced trauma, predictability is one of the things that is going to help you come back from that and create more of that sense of safety that is missing in your brainstem, right? So you've got to have predictability before you can build success at a family mealtime.
Thank you. Could you say that in different words one more time to emphasize it for our listeners? Not, again, listeners, never shame, never blame here. It is about realizing there are little tweaks we can all make, even for parents on the run. If you're parenting on the run or eating dinner on the run, that's okay. You can still make it. Hey, every time we're eating in the car on the way to soccer practice, this will be our ritual. This is the way we'll do it. Well, so please
Mhm.
emphasize that piece.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll say again, if you have experienced any kind of trauma or lack of safety around meal times, unpredictability, transition issues, whatever, before that person is going to be able to feel safe and comfortable and participate in that mealtime in a way that others see as successful, whatever label we're putting around that, right? For that person to be able to safely engage, they need predictability. We have to build a predictable structure so their brain starts to recognize what safety looks like, right? And that's so important, not just for trauma survivors, not just for people on the autism spectrum, not just for all of our neurodivergent friends and family, but it's important for all of us because you know what? You call out like eating in the car, eating on the run, eating in the rush. So many of us are actually in a place of constant rush and hurry
Yes.
around family meals and around this whole evening routine that we actually are training ourselves to engage in meals in a very kind of fight or flight way, right?
Absolutely.
And what are we doing? We're training ourselves to see mealtime as a hassle, as something that we just survive and not something that can help us thrive. And so building in whatever that routine or ritual is, if you're eating in the car and that's all you've got, great. Okay, fine. Then yeah, what are we putting on the stereo in the car? What are we listening to that we all listen to together that helps us like get ready to eat? What is the thing? Are we calling out a specific type of conversation starter each time that we're eating in the car and making sure that everybody gets a turn to engage? Whatever that is, to just kind of wrap predictability around something that feels very unstructured can actually be super beneficial to making it feel more rewarding.
And as you're speaking, I'm envisioning this family who has to get to soccer practice. Okay, so let's pre-pack little bag lunches.
Mhm.
Let's have, our carrots in there, our sandwich in there, our dessert, whatever it is we're taking, apple. And then we have that. Everybody now take your lunches to the car. It doesn't have to be fancy. And so we have lunch, we have dinner, whatever it is, and we're saying, okay, now this part of it's done. Now let's enjoy the drive to soccer or to grandma's house or to art class, wherever we're headed. And again, I love that piece where we can make it so we're not in fight or flight mode. Our
Mhm.
nervous system's down-regulated, we're calm, we're having fun. We are using mealtime to connect, not to get
Exactly.
through. And it's interesting when we keep bringing trauma into the mix. And I think it's one of the reasons when we see meal times, especially around holidays, birthdays. Oh my
Mm.
goodness, do people
Mhm.
get triggered? All of those
Mhm.
old family dynamics, unhealed wounds, they come out. You add on, unfortunately, those who drink a lot of alcoholic beverages or whatever. So now we're adding in that to the mix. And I think a lot of people hold on to those really sad and scary memories from childhood, and then they carry over into holiday meals or birthday festivities, just going all awry because of the unresolved issues underneath that sometimes can't fully be resolved if we're still revisiting grandma's house and grandma's, a raging
Mhm.
alcoholic. We can't control that, but we can control the response. to it.
Yeah, yeah. And we can put boundaries around it, and but we can also, I think, I'm so glad that you brought up holidays, family gatherings, right? Because this is a huge opportunity for some real challenge if you are dealing with neurodivergence, right? Because not only do you have everything that you just said and all the dynamics that we're aware of, right? And many more, but you also have the potential for some other pitfalls here. And one is that if if you're bringing a neurodivergent child into a big family gathering, wow, okay, sensory overload,
Mhm.
overstimulation, expectations for neurotypical behavior that are not within that child's wheelhouse and their capability. So now you're inviting judgment because everybody's got that aunt who can't keep her mouth shut about whatever it is, right? If that were my child, I would. Or why doesn't your kid eat at, I would never let him eat mac and cheese at Thanksgiving dinner, right? I mean, you get the whole thing. People just love to pile on,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
that's a whole other, and here you've got this kid who maybe has 4 safe foods and just needs to be able to eat whatever they can eat safely and comfortably in peace, right? Or they get overstimulated and dysregulated in crowds, and now there's 30 people that they barely see, right, twice a year at the family gathering, who are trying to hug them and invade their personal boundaries. And maybe this is not a child who can deal with physical hugging and touching, and it's loud and it smells weird, and this is a recipe for real disaster if we don't set this child and this environment up for success, right? And there are ways to do that, but it is a really difficult thing. And I just want to like call it out and honor, first of all, anybody who feels that kind of anxiety around these gatherings, because it's real. It's okay that you feel anxious. Like there's a reason for that, you know?
Absolutely. And I'm glad we're pausing here because this is for adults who often get, again, I know so many people. Childhood dinner time was not calm and kind and consistent and gentle. Dad was raging at the table. Whatever was happening, kids were fighting, poking at each other, literally or figuratively. And so meal is, again, a lot of trauma is held in the body and the mind from that. So when we look at those who also have neurodivergence, any sort of other issues on top of that, we really have to appreciate that mealtime can be not only not inviting, it can be really fear-inducing, really anxiety-inducing, extremely stressful. And so here comes a Bri to the rescue. I'm putting a lot on you.
Dun, dun, dun,
Where
dun.
da 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 da, here's Bri, who's saying, okay, wait a second, we can start undoing this. We can work on our trauma or simply negative patterns. There doesn't have to be trauma. There can just be negative patterns that are hardwired in, like racing through a meal,
Mhm.
and which is not really good for your digestive system and other things. But we can really use mealtime as the opportunity to do some healing.
Mhm.
Not just because every time we're creating healthier patterns, we are healing those parts of ourselves that need some attention, some TLC, some self-regulation. And we are also healing the family because then we're passing this huge gift on to our partners and our kids, no matter what age they are. Wait a second, it's a very special time of day.
Mhm.
This is a time of day where we get to sit, enjoy this nourishing food together, and connect and have fun.
Mm. And I love that you said that about healing ourselves through the way that we approach these rituals with our kids, right? Because one of the things, thinking about this letter that we started with, one of the things that this person can do to not have her child feel stigma and shame and weirdness is to honor this child's needs and space and what this child responds to in the home and the mealtime environment. And that might not look at first, or maybe even ever, exactly like we all sit down and we all have our napkins on our laps and we all eat our meal for 20 minutes in a relaxed fashion and discuss world events and how our day was and have fun, right? I think people have this like pattern in their heads that this June Cleaver sort of like family dinner with the pot roast and the lemon meringue pie, and everybody is scrubbed and shining and knows exactly how to behave at the table, like that's what we're going to get to, right? That's just not realistic for a lot of people. And I think that first, giving yourselves permission to respond to the family that you have, the people who are in your home, and what do they need, and build your meal times around that. So like if your child is really uncomfortable sitting in your dining room chairs and that causes a cascade of things that make dinner really uncomfortable and miserable for everybody, well, does that child need support cushions? Do they need stretchy bands around their chair legs so that they have something to push against? Do they need a footstool? Do they need you to move dinner away from the dining room table, maybe for a little while, and eat someplace else? Is there a kid-sized solution where they can sit near you and be eating with you, but in a more comfortable place? Can you eat picnic style on the floor with a blanket? What is the thing, right, that solves that for that child? And then what you're saying is, I see you. Your comfort matters. Your needs matter. And you're not weird. I'm not trying to shove you into this box of being a dining room chair sitting person and you're bad and wrong if you don't. I'm going, oh, wow, that's not what you need right now, huh? We can still eat together. That's okay. Let's figure out how we can do that safely and effectively for you. Right. And that's the gift, is I see you, I respond to you. We make this work in a way that's rewarding for everyone. Right.
So beautifully put, Bri. I'll restate what you said. Respond to the family you have. And sometimes, as you say, it's eating in one of my favorite styles, which is picnic style. I get to sit in my yoga position and, kids love often picnic style. It's different, but if it works and that's what works for your family, picnic style it is. And I love the idea of the stretchy bands, maybe on the chair if everyone's seated at a table. We want to be accommodating. It may look different from what a magazine might have you believe is the right way to do it, or, a television show, whatever it is. But we do, as adults, we have the right and the responsibility to customize things to make them work for us and our families. There's no shame in that. There's actually a lot of empowerment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the real shame is in unpacking, what the expectations that we have that have been put on us by our society and what we think of as like the right way. There is no right way to have a family meal. There are ways that are nourishing and helpful to your family, and there are ways that are counterproductive to that, right? So we know what doesn't work for our family. Why are we going to keep trying to pursue that? Figure out what does work. Free yourselves to really think about, what are these barriers for this child? Does the food smell too much, right? Is it too much sensory? Okay, maybe we need to open the windows or eat outdoors if the weather permits, or we need to let that child have a container of cinnamon that they can smell if the food smell is too overwhelming. Here's something that they really like smelling. Okay, they can sit there with that and that makes them feel better, right? What are these things that nobody tells us are okay that are actually super okay, right? Don't let shame overwhelm you when it's imposed by a broader culture that doesn't sit in your house and eat your food every day.
Absolutely. And if we're trying to make mealtime fun, enjoyable, connective, we simply want to look at, what does this individual need? What do I need? What do we all need? And it doesn't mean it has to be more complex. Once you figure it out, then you have the tools. It may take a little time to figure out some of what you really need for each child, but then it's about using those tools and embracing them so that you can move forward and enjoy these really important family connections day after, or not, maybe not day after day, because that's, you might not be able to do it day after day, but you can do pieces of it
Yeah, regularly. We can come
regularly.
back to this, right? We can come back to this moment. Yeah. And I think, just reminding everybody that the real power of family meals is in creating an environment where everybody in your family feels like they can show up and be themselves, relaxed, unfiltered, no like behavioral thing that they have to put on to be somebody. They don't have a family dinner persona. They are themselves, and they come whole to the table, and you receive them whole at the table or at the picnic blanket. However they show up. That's the power of family meals. And so whenever you're dealing with trauma, neurodivergence, any kind of difference, making that home environment the place where that child or that person can show up wholly themselves and not feel judged and not feel diminished for that, that's the environment you're seeking.
It is such a beautiful way to end or draw our time together to a close. And I love again how just that concept of, in a world where we often feel judged, we often feel shamed for being who we are, where there's school, sometimes bullying, or out in the world, feeling shamed or judged. If we can make family mealtime, even in the smallest of ways, this sacred space where we get to enjoy each other, welcome each other as we are in a whole way. Of course, we all want to we don't want to be yelling and screaming at each other. We're not talking about that. We're talking about, hey, bring a good self, bring your imperfect self to the table and welcome everyone as their imperfect selves. And that allows us to connect and have family meals be a safe time of day. And maybe in some, depending upon what's going on in the outside world, it can be maybe the only truly safe time in someone's day.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. Perfectly put.
well, you set the stage with your brilliance, Bri. So thank you. Where can our listeners find out more about you, Family Dinner Project, and of course, the book that is, if
Yes.
you'll please talk about the amazing book that is all about family dinners.
Yes, love to. So you can find us online at thefamilydinnerproject.org. And if you're specifically looking for resources that are around what we've been talking about today, trauma and neurodivergence at mealtimes, we have our Welcoming Table initiative. You can either search Welcoming Table on our website, or you can look, usually we have it right on the homepage, or thefamilydinnerproject.org/welcoming-table. But we also, as you've mentioned, have a book. It's called Eat, Laugh, Talk, the Family Dinner Playbook. And it is 52 weeks of menus, games, conversation starters, and stories from real families about what worked and didn't work for them and how they creatively solved some of what we've been talking about today. All of these things that make it hard to have a mealtime that works for us, and how they got to that place of, this is what works for us. And so all of their ideas and brilliance are in there as well. And you can find Eat, Laugh, Talk anywhere that books are sold.
And listeners, Eat, Laugh, Talk, I have a copy of it. It is gorgeous. It is really a great gift, too. It
Oh,
is a great gift for families, for moms, dads, anyone, caregivers, grandma, grandpa, because it brings us back to some of these basics of how to have fun, make mealtime fun, make it enjoyable, make it your own.
absolutely. Have a great time together.
Thank you again, Bri. It has been such a joy and such a pleasure. And listeners, thank you for your time with us today. It has been such a joy and a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Thank you, Bri. And thank you, listeners. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.